Hello again, everybody. This is Brian, and today we're going to discuss the most common reasons that Windows computers slow down with age and usage. Did you ever know that when you buy a new Windows computer, and this goes with any version of Windows XP 7, 10, because inherently the structure of Windows is the same with all of them, and therefore they share a lot of the same common issues no matter which the version is. How when you buy it and you bring it home, it's blazingly fast and it can do anything at the click of a mouse, and you click it and boom, it's there. And then after 6 months, you start waiting a couple of seconds, and 9 months you're waiting a minute or two, and the more time goes by, the slower and slower it seems to get, until you find yourself impatiently almost wanting to yell at it to speed up. Well, today what I'm going to talk about is the 10 most common reasons why this occurs, and it has to do basically with the way Windows is designed. So the first reason we're going to talk about is something called the Windows Registry. Now, no other operating system has a registry. Linux doesn't, Mac OS doesn't, none of the mobile operating systems such as Android or iOS have it. It's basically a Windows thing. And what the registry is when Windows first came out and they wanted to convert from DOS to an actual Windows operating system, they put in this huge database, which they called a registry. And any program that wants to run on that Windows computer must be installed into the registry. So you buy a computer, you don't have all that much on it, the registry's fairly small. You start adding programs, all of those programs go into the Windows registry, so the registry gets bigger and bigger. The problem comes in where when you start deleting programs, even though the files and the subdirectories on the file system that make up that program are deleted when you uninstall it, very often the registry entries are not. Now, the way Windows works, every time you boot up Windows, it's got to read in the entire registry. Not part of it, the entire thing. So the bigger it gets, the longer it takes to read it on boot up. And that's why Windows seems to take longer as you boot it up. When you start installing and uninstalling and installing and uninstalling programs, you start getting registry entries that no longer have any files associated with them. So when the computer, the operating system, goes through those registry, they call them keys, they try to find what the registry keys are pointing to, which is no longer there. Okay, so the computer tries to find it, and when it doesn't find it, it's got to wait for like a timeout period until the system tells it, hey, what you're looking for isn't here, and then it returns an error message back, and the registry moves on from there. So the more programs you install and uninstall, or it could even affect videos that you watch or other things you do with your computer, whatever starts leaving debris in the registry, it's going to slow the machine down, because the registry A is going to get bigger, it's going to take longer to read, because when you click on a program, the operating system has to find where in the registry that program is, so it goes through the registry, finds it, goes to it. If that registry has a lot of non-existent junk in it, it's got to go through a lot more empty stuff. So that's one reason it slows it down. A good way to prevent this is every now and then get a good registry cleaner. I may give a little tips on how to speed things up, but that basically what I want to do here is explain why it slows down, and then we could have another video on what to do about it. But cleaning the registry is important, because registry issues can make a big difference. Another thing that can slow your computer down is hard disk fragmentation. Now, what You may ask, what's fragmentation? My hard disk isn't fragmented, it's in one piece. Well, yeah, the disk platter is in one piece, but the way computers in general, and Windows specifically, is a big culprit for this. When a file is stored in the beginning is a contiguous block of data. So your hard drive head's got to go to that block, read the data, boom, the data's read. When you change the data and you go to write the data back to the hard drive, it'll no longer fit in the space it came out of. So it puts a piece of it here and a piece of it there. So now, in order to run that same program, you need two hard disk accesses, one for each piece. And of course, it's got to find each piece. So that uses up what they call more seek time. So you have more seek time and more read time. Okay, you use it again, you save it, and if it's a database or something that you use a lot of times, it could develop hundreds of fragments. So to load that same file that it used to just seek it, read it, and have it, now it's got to do 100 seeks and 100 reads of all these little pieces, and then it's got to take all those little pieces and assemble them together. So disk fragmentation, or actually file fragmentation on the disk, they're pretty much used synonymously out in the real world, is very, very important. So that's where defragmentation of your hard disk comes in handy. And Windows does provide you with a method of defragmenting, but if you don't know about it, you might not be able to make sure that it gets used. So that's important in keeping your Windows machine running the way it did when you got it. Another thing is what they call bloatware. Okay, bloatware is when you go to the store and you buy a computer and they give you all these free trials of all these things that they try to get you to try it so that you like it, so you'll buy it. So the software is on your computer. You have to remember that. The software is on your computer, and it's got a little clock in there that says that on such and such a date after you start your trial, it will no longer run unless you download an activation key, okay? And you have to pay for that, buy that. So they let you try the software for free, and if you like it, they hope you will like it, and then you'll buy it, and then they make a profit from selling it to you. But the software is on your computer, and that's taking up disk space. And as we'll get to, anything that takes up disk space, not only does it take up physical space on the disk, not only does it contribute to file fragmentation, but it also it affects the registry, because again, it's installed on your computer. So bloatware indirectly affects many, many other factors. So ideally, you want a clean install of Windows. You don't want any bloatware. You don't want any trials of anything you're not going to use. A lot of times when you go to download a program, you do want, it'll ask you if you want to try free trials of this, that, and the other program. And that's really not good either. You want to get what you want and nothing else. So you want to be very careful about this thing called bloatware. Okay? Another factor is when you start getting additional programs, okay, they take up room on your disk drives. You also have old files that you don't use anymore, okay, and a lot of temporary files. The way Windows works, it's not a very good housekeeper. It doesn't clean up after itself very well. So if you go on the internet and you have a typical 20, 30-minute surfing session, whatever, if you looked at the number of temporary internet files that you collect on your hard drive, that when you close your browser and you're off the internet, all those temporary files are still there. And they take up space on the hard drive. Taking up space on a hard drive affects file fragmentation. It can affect the registry in some cases, and it definitely affects the effectiveness of how the hard drive works. That's why disk cleanup is very important, because the more programs you install, you're going to get registry and hard drive space. Old files you no longer use, you're going to increase fragmentation and use up space, and also temporary files. And you also have to remember the way a computer works, it's going to take a lot of that what you want to use it for, and it can't hold everything in memory at the same time. So it's going to be writing some of that out the hard drive temporarily and then reading it back in. So a hard drive is going to need some temporary sort space. And if you have that hard drive filled almost to capacity, where's the computer going to put the sort stuff, the stuff it's got to store temporarily? They sometimes have a separate partition for that called a page file. In Linux, they do have a separate partition. In Windows, they generally do too, but the more empty space you have on your hard disk, generally the more efficiently a hard disk can work. My general rule of thumb is I don't like to fill a hard disk up more than half of its capacity. I always like to have at least half my hard drive empty for the computer to use it for what it needs to use it for. Other people might have different rules, but if you fill it up to capacity, you could run into problems. Another factor is going to be antivirus and other security programs. Now, these are very, very important. Please do not misunderstand me. I'm not telling you don't have these. But what I'm saying is these run in the background, and everything that comes in or out of that computer's got to be scanned. And that uses machine resources. That uses CPU cycles, it uses memory space. So they do tend to have an impact on speed. And unfortunately, with new viruses, new Trojans, new phishing schemes, new worms, new malware, which is now the general term for any kind of software that's not good, and there's a ton of them, there's new stuff coming out every day. So the database, the number of threats that these security programs have to scan for is increasing every day. And if you're a security program and you only have to scan for 10 threats, it doesn't take that long. If you have to scan for 10,000 threats, it's going to take a lot longer. So as more and more threats are out there, the longer it's going to take these programs to do their job, and the longer, the slower the machine will operate. Another major threat are the viruses and the spyware, because these, assuming they get through your security program, or if you don't have a security program, or whatever the reason, these viruses are going to make the machine do things that you don't want it to do. And whatever it's doing isn't good, but it is using machine resources. In fact, one of the key red flags that you might be infected is if your computer gets really, really slow, really, really fast. Because usually they kind of gradually decrease with performance over time. But if you're running pretty good one day and the next day you're working like a snail, you probably have a virus. And spyware, the same thing, because that's using machine resources to either use your webcam or your microphone or log your keystrokes or do whatever it's doing, and it's sending it back to the attacker. So it's using the resources of your computer, again, in a negative way, and that'll slow it down. So another one is system updates, okay? And again, I'm not saying this is bad, I'm just explaining the facts here. System updates increase the size of the operating system, and they make the operating system do more things. The more things the operating system does, the more machine resources, the more CPU cycles it uses, the more memory it uses, the more hard disk space it uses. Depending on your degree of fragmentation, which we discussed earlier, the more seek and reads it's going to use. So just merely updating your system can actually wind up slowing it down. It's a good thing to keep your system updated, but you have to understand it can affect the speed that the machine operates at. Another reason that a machine can slow down is RAM. Random access memory. We're all fairly familiar with that. You might ask, well, why would that have an effect over time? Because you could have a certain amount of RAM which is sufficient to run the basic operating system when you loaded it, and the small amount of programs that you loaded it in the beginning. But as you buy and load newer programs are more complex. They need more memory. So if you're running a computer that's, let's say, 4 years old, and you buy a program that was just released last month, that new program is going to require a lot more memory than a program that was written about the time you bought the computer. So you might run low on RAM, and then you have to use the hard drive is what they call a paging file on the hard drive, and then that's going to bottleneck and slow the whole thing down. So you kind of want to keep that in the back of your minds as well. Another thing that's very important to note is what they call startup processes. Every time you turn your computer on, things are going to load and start executing in the background. Now, this increases over time because a lot of programs that you buy think that, oh, you're going to want to run them. They're the latest, they're the greatest, they're, the hottest thing on the market. So they're going to insert themselves in your startup process, whether you want them running in the background or not. And everything running in the background is going to be taking up space. So when you buy, a new, paint program, it's going to add itself to the startup processes if you add whatever. So over time, your list of programs that start when the computer starts gets longer and longer and longer. And all these machines, even though you don't see them running because they're running in the background, they're using, again, CPU cycles. They're using memory. They're using hard disk accesses. So they are slowing your computer down by using machine resources, even though you're completely oblivious. You don't even know that they're running. There is a way to tell, and you could go in actually and configure your system not to run them at startup, which is the best thing to do. Another thing, and this is the last thing we're going to discuss today, are visual and other special effects. Windows, I think since XP wasn't too bad. It was a little bit in XP, but 8, 7, the later versions where they have drop shadows, where they smooth rough edges, where you have, even transitions between windows with the drop and drag and the introduction of arrow and all these things that make it look really, really pretty. Well, it may look really, really pretty, but again, you have to remember all that uses CPU cycles, memory, hard disk accesses, and other machine resources. What I usually do personally, because I don't care if it looks really fancy, I just want it to work pretty quickly, I turn all that stuff off. And sometimes you could get a significant increase in speed just by turning all that stuff off, because it doesn't functionally affect the computer, but it just doesn't look as nice. But I don't care if I have, a little roughness to an edge, or if I don't have a drop shadow, or if I don't see the content of the file while I'm dragging it. Because to me, the trade-off of getting increased speed versus slowness is worth it. And again, the more programs you add, the more of these special effects come into place, because some of the new programs you buy and install use them, and that's going to slow the system down as well. So those are my top 10 reasons why Windows computers slow down. The more you use them, the longer you have them, the slower they're going to get. In another video, I hope to cover ways of negating these, and I kind of touched on some of them in this video. Most of them have ways where you can minimize the impact by configuring your system and cleaning the registry and turning things off. but some of them are inevitable just because as time, programming, and applications get more complicated, they sort of tend to begin to overwhelm the older, slower, less beefy equipment. So I hope everybody got something out of this video.